Hello and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hey, hello, my name is Meg and we do crafty things here. So if you like crafty things, please do consider subscribing. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing and tuning in to another video. So today we're going to be doing another tutorial. It's a bit of a long one, so grab your drink, grab your snacks, and cozy up, because today we're going to be making this here kind of Aztec style pattern. It was a request from one of you guys to my BraceletBook account, and that's going to be today's project. So if you're interested in learning how to knot this bracelet, then let's get to it. So for today's bracelet, you're going to need 4 different colors. We're going to need one for the background, one for these smaller triangles here. We'll need one for our outline color and one for these larger triangles. In addition to that, you're going to need a pair of scissors, of course, because we're working with string, and something to anchor your project down. I'll be using tape as usual, but you use whatever you're comfortable with. In addition, you're going to need, in my case, something for your bass strings. I'll be using Aunt Lydia's Fashion 3. So to start this off, we're going to need to tape down 9 bass strings. I've also gone ahead and taped down my small triangle color as well as my background color, because we will be introducing both of those colors right away. So the first string we are going to knot with is actually our small triangle color, as there is a stripe of it coming into the pattern diagonally. So we're going to do forwards knots because we are starting our rows left to right. Whenever you're working left to right in an alpha, you do a forwards knot. And again, that is making a 4 shape and then pulling the string through the hole once and then doing it twice to create a full forward stitch. Now we're going to tuck that string completely underneath all of our bass strings and out of the way. This is really important if you're doing regular color changes, because this is how you lock your colors in. Now we're going to pull our white string into the spot, the very same spot that we pushed that color out of, and it's going to be underneath that burgundy string, and that's going to create like a string sandwich that's going to lock everything in. And again, here we're working left to right, so we are working in forwards knots. You may need to hold that first string down a bit to get a nice clean even knot without that burgundy string kind of popping through. Now we're going to finish the rest of this row with just our white knots. So we've done 1, now we have 7 more to do, and that will take us right to the end. Now, unfortunately, this is a very big pattern, so while I normally like to do this at as close to a natural speed as I can so people can actually knot along, some of these sections where it's just forward knotting in a solid color for a period, I have had to bump up the speed a bit. So I apologize if you wanted to really knot along with it. We're already over 2 hours for this video, so it just wasn't plausible. But you're going to knot all the way to the end of your row. Now, if you're a more experienced knotter, you may choose to do a straight alpha technique on the edge. However, I'm going to go for classic here, which means my last string, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a full forwards knot. But if you were doing the straight edge, you would of course do a forwards backwards knot, and then your next knot would be a backwards forwards knot. Or sorry, a forward backwards knot. Do I even know what I'm doing? I don't know. When we're working right to left on our alpha, we're going to be doing backwards knots, which is the same as our forwards knots, except you guessed it, backwards, or we'll call it a sail shape. So you're going to make a sail shape, pull the string through the hole and pull it tight once, and then again a second time to make a full backwards knot. And we're going to do that for a total of 7 knots. And then we'll bring in our burgundy color again. Alright, so just like before, we're going to tuck our white under the remaining bass strings and push it completely out of the way so we don't get it mixed up and accidentally knot on it. Now we're going to bring that burgundy back down and into the same spot we just pushed the white out of. Now we're going to finish off these last 2 knots, and this is very important. I cannot stress it enough that burgundy string needs to be under the white string. Then you're going to do your 2 backwards knots on these last 2 strings to go right to the edge. And again, If you were doing a flat edge technique, you would be doing a backwards forwards knot and then another backwards forwards knot to reset your next row and get rid of the ridge line on the outside. I am doing the classic alpha, which means I'm doing forwards knots right to the edge and backwards knots right to the edge. All right, so now we actually get to add in our next color, but you'll see I'm still pushing my burgundy completely out of the way. This is to help give the illusion of the ridge line as I bring in this gold color. Otherwise, you won't get that string hanging over the edge and it will look kind of funny in spots where you've added in new colors. So we're going to go ahead and just do one forwards knot with our gold color here. And then we're going to tuck it under all of our bass strings and push it out of the way and bring our burgundy string down in underneath the gold color. We're going to bring it right into that same spot we pushed the gold out of, and we're going to do 2 forwards knots with our burgundy string. So here we go with 1, and yes, this is why there's so many cuts, because I spend 10 seconds on like every knot, pushing it and manipulating it until it's where I like it. And I'm not even kidding. So there we go for knot number 2. And then we're going to switch out to our white and carry on for the rest of the row. So that's 6 white knots until we reach the very end. And again, we're working from our left to our right in our pattern, which means we are doing a forwards knot. At this point we've gotten all the way to the end of the row, and because we have white on our turnaround here, we're going to just turn around and do backwards knots as we work right to left for 5 more knots until we get into our colored stripes at the introduction of our pattern here. At this point we are still not in the repeat point of the pattern, but don't worry, I will have a marker on the screen for the actual repeat point of the pattern. Right now we're in like the introduction of the pattern. So once I've done those white knots, I'm going to tuck that white string underneath all the bass strings and push it right out of the way. Then I'm going to bring our burgundy string in and I'm going to pull it right into the spot that I pushed the white out of. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 2 backwards knots because we're working right to left with that burgundy color. And that's going to continue the diagonal striping that they have kind of entering into the pattern to really kind of give it a finished look when the overall project is done. Once the 2 knots are done, I'm going to push that burgundy underneath the remaining strings and I'm going to push it right out of the way. And then I'm going to bring our gold color in and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 2 knots in that burgundy color. Not burgundy, sorry, I just did the burgundy, in that gold color. So there is 1. And there is 2. And now we finally get to see the introduction of our last color to the pattern, which is our green. So we're going to go ahead and tape it on the left-hand side because that's where we're introducing it. It's closest, it's easiest to get the most even knots to do it that way. I'm going to push the gold up and to the right completely out of the way underneath those bass strings, again, to give the illusion of a ridgeline being there, even though there isn't one because of how the strings have been added in. Then using my green I've taped in, I'm going to do 1 forwards knot because, again, left to right. Y'all know it by now. Then we're going to tuck that green bass string underneath, or the green knotting string underneath all of the bass strings and pull the gold in right where we pushed that green out. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 forwards knots with that gold color. And we're going to follow that after with 2 forwards knots with the burgundy color as we create, again, this almost candy stripe effect in the alpha style as opposed to our normal candy stripe pattern. So here we go with our second knot. And then I'm going to push the gold out and underneath the base strings, push it right up out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my burgundy color now. I'm going to pull it right up where I push that gold string out so we're not missing any base strings. And I'm going to go ahead and do 2 forwards knots with that. So there's 1. And here we are for 2. Now I'm going to push the burgundy string back behind the base strings and out of the way and bring in our background color to finish out the row, which means we're going to do 4 knots with our white color and then turn around and do 3 knots with our white color. Heading right to left, we're going to be doing backwards knots for 3 knots, and then we reach our stripe pattern again. So we're going to tuck that white background string up behind our base strings and push it right out of the way. And then we're going to bring our burgundy color in right where we pushed that white string out. And we're going to proceed with the kind of standard pattern we've been doing for the last few rows here, which is going to be 2 burgundy knots. You guessed it, 2. And then our gold will do, I'll let you guess. You're right. 2 knots as well. Gosh, you're smart. All right, so we do the 2 burgundy knots. Then we're going to push that knotting string back behind the base strings and completely out of the way. That's just so we don't accidentally knot on it, we don't get it mixed up, we don't grab the wrong knotting string and knot the wrong color, because nobody likes untying these tiny knots. Let's be honest, none of us do. Now with the gold color, we're going to do 2 knots as well. Like I said, we're working right to left, so it's backwards knots. So there's 1, and there we go for 2. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with all of our other knotting strings. We're going to push it back behind our base strings and up out of the way and bring in that bright green color and knot off these last 2 strings with our backwards knots. Honestly, I'm a little surprised. It wasn't quite the green I wanted for this pattern, but I was really vibing with the other colors, so I threw it in there, and I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite. I feel like more of like a sagey, maybe more olivey tone would have better suited this pattern, but it's not horrible. I don't hate it, but I'm not super in love with it, you know? All right, then we're going to tuck the green up and behind to the right. That again creates that false ridge line. Then we're going to bring in our base string, which is our white color, and it's going to come in and do a forwards knot right off the hop here. And this is going to allow us to start to see that this is a diagonal stripe inwards, kind of building this triangular geometric shape that we see in this pattern. So we did our 1 knot, we tuck the string under the base strings, and then we grab our green and we're going to do 2 knots with our green. Now we're working left to right at this point, so that means we're doing forwards knots. And then we're going to switch off from our green, tucking that string up in behind all of our base strings and completely out of the way, as you do. And then we're going to switch to our gold color, and then again to our burgundy, both doing 2 knots each with them. So now we push that green right up out of the way. We're going to push it behind all those base strings out of the way, because the worst thing is accidentally knotting onto another knotting string and not realizing you've done it until the next row. And then you have to undo a bunch of knots. We don't want that. So we're going to push it right out of the way and then bring the gold color in underneath that green string. So we've sandwiched it in, and then we're going to continue knotting as if nothing has happened. So again, we're working left to right, which means we're doing forwards knots. So we got our second gold knot here, and then we push it underneath the rest of the bass strings and completely out of the way. And then we go ahead and we're going to bring that burgundy string into that same spot and do our last two burgundy knots on this row. Our only two burgundy knots on this row. And then we're going to finish off this row with 2 white knots, which means we've basically done 2, 2, 2 of everything at this point. So there's 1, and here we go for 2. Perfect, and now we're going to push that out of the way, bring in our white, and do 2 forwards knots with that white to finish out the row. Then, of course, we are going to turn around and we just do a single white knot in our backward stitch. Again, if you are doing a straight edge technique, disregard this. You're going to do your forwards backwards knots or your backwards forwards knots on their respectful edges to create that effect. I'm keeping it simple here. This is just going basic old school alpha technique. Now I've turned around, I've worked right to left, so it's a backwards knot for that 1 knot. Tuck that bass string up out of the way, and then we're going to do 2 each of the burgundy, the gold, and the green. Now to finish out this row, we're going to go ahead and tuck that green string up and out of the way as we have with all of our others. And we're going to bring in our background color to do our last 2 backwards knots and give us that background color. And this is going to really start defining that stripe pattern that we see leading in and then in the middle repeat section of our pattern. So at this point, like I said, we aren't quite at that repeat point yet. I will have a little thing on the screen that lets you know the repeat point. So however long you're making the pattern, you can go back to the repeat point and you repeat from there, as opposed to adding this entire angular start that we see here. So next we're going to go ahead and do 3 forwards knots as we enter into the next row. And then we are kind of lather, rinse, repeating for this entire first section. So I am going to bump up the speed on the rest of this row as well as the next couple rows. And then once we get more into the meat of the pattern, I'll slow it back down so that we're at a normal knotting speed. But I kind of feel like a broken record at this point, just going 2 knots, 2 knots, 2 knots, 2 knots, 2 knots, 2 knots, when I think the pattern is clearly discernible at this point. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to do 2 green knots, 2 gold knots, and then we're going to do 2 burgundy knots. And I'll be back with you then. so now as we turn around, we're going to do just a single burgundy knot, doing a backwards knot as we're working right to left. We're going to tuck that right up underneath, and we're going to continue with the standard pattern here of 2 gold and then 2 green. And then we'll finish out the row with our white. Now that we are done with the green, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tuck it underneath all of our base strings and push it out of the way as we've been doing, and we're going to pull in that white string underneath that green string so we've locked it in place. Now we're going to do 4 backwards knots to finish out this row just with our white color. And then once we get to the end of the row, we'll turn around and start with a white chunk again. And then after this next row here, I will slow things back down to normal speed here so that we can knot together into kind of the meat and bones of the pattern, so to speak. So once we've reached the end of our row here, we're going to go ahead and turn around. I'm working left to right. We're going to do 5 forwards knots with our background white color. And this will be, as I mentioned, the last row that's kind of just setting up the pattern. Like when you look at the pattern as a whole, this geometric diagonal start really gives the full finished product structure that definitely elevates it and makes it look finished. As far as actually knotting the pattern and teaching you how to knot it, it is a little bit tedious because I feel like it's a very intuitive kind of pattern that's going on here of, you know, this color for 2, this color for 2, this color for 2, and just kind of staggering it up. But I digress. I said I would teach you, so here we are. Now I've done my 5 knots. I've tucked that white knotting string back in behind the rest of the base strings, and I've pulled my green in underneath that white string. Now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to do 2 forward knots with that green string just to continue on that stripe that really gives this pattern the structure it needs. Tell me just how many times does repeating the same thing over and over again, like at what point does it actually become insanity? Because now we're gonna push that green string out of the way, bring the gold in, and finish out the row with 2 knots in our gold color. So there is 1 and then 2. Then to start our next row, we're going to go ahead and do 1 final gold knot, working right to left, so we know that's a backwards knot. And then we're going to switch off to our green. Now tucking that gold string back and out of the way, as we've now completely finished that entry gold stripe, we're going to bring in our green color underneath that gold, as we have with every other color change, and we're going to go ahead and do 2 backwards knots with our green color to continue that stripe. But we are not finishing out the row with just a series of white knots. We have now officially reached the point where we are really getting into the more intricate part of the pattern. Not at the repeat point though. All right, so now we're going to tuck that green string back and out of the way, and we're going to pull in our background string. Now we're going to do 3 backward knots with our white string, and then we're going to bring in our burgundy, or our small triangle color, as I called it in the introduction. So there's 1 and 2, and finally our 3rd. Now pushing that out of the way, we're going to bring in that burgundy color, making sure every new color we bring in is coming in underneath our last color. Now you can see in this case, it did catch up some other strings under it. To keep the back of your bracelet as smooth as possible, try to only capture in one, maybe two strings if you have to, and push the rest out of the way. Because our main goal is really just locking in the last color you used. So we're going to go ahead and do just one single knot with this burgundy color, and then we're going to go ahead and finish out the last two knots on this row with our background color, just doing two backwards knots. We're going to go ahead and bring in our burgundy color, and this is going to start forming our first triangle in our series of small triangles that make a larger triangle. You know, that's not a great way of explaining this, but we are starting to build some structure here. So we're going to go ahead, we're working left to right, and we're going to do forwards knots. So we've done one, and now we're going to do our second one, and then we're going to switch off back to our background color again. So remember, when you're doing your forwards and backwards knots, we always want to be doing two knots around each string to complete a full stitch or knot. So we've gone ahead, I've done that, and now we're going to push that burgundy back behind the base strings and out of the way, and then bring in our background string. We're going to go ahead and do 4 knots with our white string. So we've already done 1, there's 2, 3, and lastly 4. Now we're going to push the white string out of the way, and we're going to continue on with our green stripe here. So we're going to bring our green color in underneath that white string into the spot that it just vacated. And we're going to go ahead and do 2 forward knots with our green string. Now the exciting part is the start of our next row actually finishes that geometric stripe pattern that starts off this whole pattern, which means we are getting closer to the repeat point, which is, in my opinion, exciting because that means we're almost to the halfway point of the video. So once we've got to the end, we're going to go ahead and working right to left, we're going to start backwards knots. We're going to do 1 backward knot in our green color, and then we're going to go ahead and push that underneath all of our base strings and right out of the way. Then we're going to bring our white string in, and we're going to go ahead and do 5 backward knots with our white string, and that'll bring us back to our small triangle that we're working on. There's 2 and 3, 4, and 5. Now we push that string out of the way and bring in our burgundy string, as we have so many times already. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 3 knots with our burgundy string, finishing out this row with that color. So now we're going to tuck our red string underneath all of our base strings and to the right of our pattern. This is going to lock in that color, and it's going to give the illusion of our ridge lines still continuing, despite the fact that technically they are broken. So we're going to bring our white color in, and we're going to do a single forward knot with our white color. And then we're going to switch back to that burgundy, tucking the white underneath and pulling the burgundy in under the white to do 2 knots in our burgundy color. There we go, 1 and 2. So now we're going to bring in our background string again. At this point though, we aren't going to go right up to the stripe. We are actually only going to go for 2 white knots, doing forwards knots, and then we're going to switch out and we're going to go back to our maroon color to start the second triangle in our triangle of triangles. You know what I mean, the second small triangle in our pattern here. So now we've done 2, we're going to push that background string out of the way and bring the maroon string underneath that white string. And we're going to go ahead and do 1 single maroon knot before we finally switch out and finish out the row with our white. Now we'll go ahead and finish out this row with 3 white knots straight to the top. And this marks the first row that introductory line pattern we've been working on is actually complete. So we're going ahead and there is number 3. Then we're going to turn it around and doing backwards knots. We're going to do 3 backwards knots. And then we're going to switch back to our maroon color to work on our second triangle. So there's number 3. We're going to push that to the back and bring in the maroon string. Now with that maroon string, we're going to go ahead and do 2 backwards knots. And then after the 2 backwards knots with our maroon, we're going to go ahead and push that back out of the way and bring in our white for a single knot before we finish out our first small triangle. Now, like I mentioned before, this may be a spot where we've done a lot of really small, quick color changes that you find you need to manipulate your strings a little more, tug on strings, kind of press down on things to stabilize them as you're knotting, and that's totally normal. You can see some of it in here, but I have chopped and cut out a lot of that throughout this entire video because there is a lot of small color changes like that consist of just 1 or 2 knots. Now that we've done that 1 background knot, we're going to go ahead and pull our maroon in and we're going to do a single maroon knot to finish out our first small triangle of the pattern. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and finish out this row with our white string, completing the row with 2 backwards knots with that white color. Introduce the inner large triangle shapes. So they do have an outline, which for the colors I picked is going to be green. So we're going to fold this white string back up in behind and out of our way to the right, and we're going to swoop that green into its place. Now our green, we're just going to start out with a singular knot here, and we're working left to right, so we're doing a forwards knot. And remember, once and then twice equals a full knot. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to tuck that green up in behind, and we're going to switch back over to our white color. And in doing so, we are then going to complete 2 white knots before we work on our second triangle. This is getting exciting because we are reaching the repeat point of the pattern, which is very important because at this point, everything up until now, you will only do once in this pattern, and that is simply to start the pattern out. So at this point, if you were making, let's say, a lanyard necklace, you would only do this at the very beginning until we reach the repeat point, and then that's actually where the pattern starts to go over and over again. and then you can complete it out at the end. So now that we've done our 2 white knots, we're going to bring in our maroon color, and then we're going to do 3 maroon knots, and that's going to be the center point of our second triangle. As you guys can see now, our pattern's sort of starting to take some shape. You can see what we're talking about when we're talking about lines, when we're talking about the small triangles. This is where I generally start to get happy with a bracelet, because I'm like, finally, you can kind of see the progress more when we reach this point. In the beginning, it's kind of, to me, it's the push through point. Then when you actually get into seeing the pattern identifiably as what you're looking at, when you just see the preview on like BraceletBook, that's my favorite part, when you're like, I can see things taking shape. What about you guys? What is your favorite part of the bracelet making process? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you like starting? Do you like ending the bracelets? Do you like all of it? What are your favorite parts? Now we're going to switch over to the white string again, and we're going to finish out this row with white knots. So let's 3 white knots right to the end of the row. We're going to start our 3rd small triangle. So we're actually going to start this row with 1 backwards knot in our maroon color. Then we're going to tuck that away, and the next few knots we're going to do in our white color. So we're going to tuck that out of the way, bring in our white, and we're going to do 2 white knots until we reach the top of our half-finished triangle at this point. And of course, we're working right to left now, so it's backwards knots. So here we go for 1, and then here we go again for 2. Then we're going to tuck that in behind, and we're going to go ahead and grab our maroon string, and we're going to be back in a 2-2-2 pattern. We are going to go 2 knots of our maroon, and then 2 knots of our white, and 2 knots of our green to finish out this row. So now with our maroon, we're doing 2 backwards knots. So 1 and 2. Then we're going to tuck that up and out of the way, and we're going to switch over to our background string again. Now that we're at our background string, like I said earlier, we're going to go ahead and do 2 knots with our white string. And then we're going to switch to our green string and finish out the row with our green. This is going to be the width of our stripe that goes around that larger triangle within our small triangles. This is going to give us that really geometric kind of Aztec-y type pattern. I feel like I keep saying that over and over again, but I really don't know how to describe it because this pattern is just very geometric. It's not like I could be like, oh, and now we're doing the smile. It is just all shapes and lines, so forgive me for not describing things very eloquently here. All right, now that we have finished that row with the green, we're going to toss that green up and in behind to the right and bring in our gold color to start our first larger triangle in our pattern. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a single knot with this gold color. Working left to right, we are doing forwards knots at this point. Then we're going to toss it to the back like we have just done with the green and pull that green back into its place. Now that we've brought our green back into play, we've disentangled it from our other strings that it's catching on, we can go ahead and knot 2 knots with that green string. So there's one. And you can see me give a tug on that gold because it is starting to kind of roll funny because it was just a single knot and it was right on the edge of the piece. So this pattern I find does need a considerable amount of actual manhandling or manipulation, if you will. Once we've done those 2 green knots, we're going to switch out to our background color. And we're going to do 2 knots in our white. And then we're going to finish out that second triangle. So here we go, 1. I said, here we go, and immediately my brain went, here we go, loop-de-loo. I don't know why, but this is what happens when you're filming your voiceovers late at night. I think that's all the explanation that's needed. So now we're working on knot number 2 here with that white, and we're going to switch it out to our maroon color to finish out that second triangle. That second triangle is being finished out with just a single maroon knot. And then we're going to have quick color successions here again. We'll do 1 maroon knot, and then we're going to go right into a single white knot before finishing out the row with our maroon color again. So there is 1. And then we're going to swap that out of the way. And I mean, if you have made it to this point, like, gold stars for you. I find it extremely tedious to edit and record the voiceovers for these videos, but I know a lot of people love that they can see the full pattern or even just have it playing in the background. So I appreciate you if you've made it this far. All right, we've done 1 knot with our white, and then we're going to finish this out with just 2 knots with our maroon, starting into the topmost small triangle and the triangle that designates our repeat point is very, very soon here, folks, which means we are coming up on the halfway point of this video, which is remarkable because these videos take so long to edit, and I even find as I'm doing the voiceovers that I'm able to trim more and more and more out, which is equal parts frustrating because I feel like I have to wait forever in certain parts. I'm like, oh, you should have snipped that out. And then there's points where I'm like, I maybe should have slowed that down. And you just don't know until you do the voiceover. I have also done myself no favor in making this the first video to post back in a long while when I am not used to editing. At any rate, we are doing 3 backwards knots with our maroon string at this point, working right to left. And then we're going to switch off to our white string, pushing that maroon back and bringing our white string in, always underneath the knotting string you've just pushed out. And we're going to go ahead and do 2 knots with our white string. Two knots with our green string, and then 2 knots with our gold string to finish out the row. So there's 1 and 2. Then we're going to push that out of the way and bring in that really bright green. So we bring that in and we do 1 and 2. First 3 forwards knots completed in that same gold color we finished the last row out with, we're going to switch back to our green color. With our green, we're going to continue our kind of border that we've got going on here, and we're going to do 2 forward knots because we're working left to right. And then we're going to switch to our white and do the same thing. The white in hand, we're going to go ahead and complete 2 forward knots with that background color. And with the white out of the way, we'll pull in the maroon and finish out this row with 2 forward maroon knots. And then, my friends, we will have reached a very exciting point. Because the start of the next row is in fact the repeat point. So everything after this row is actually where your pattern repeats. So you repeat from this point on over and over and over and over and over again to make your bracelet as long as you want. And then you're going to finish out a stripe just as you did at the start. So this is a very critical point. For me, I did one of the repeat sections and then I just finished the pattern out mirror-wise how we started it, because I just did mine like small enough to cover the top of my wrist, but you can repeat it for however many instances you want to. And at this point that I've been blabbering on about that, I have completed 1 maroon backwards knot and then 2 white backwards knots. And now you can see I've grabbed that green and we're doing, you guessed it, 2 backwards knots to complete that little border we've got going around what's going to be a gold colored triangle. So I've gone ahead, I've done those 2 knots. Now I'm going to push that green right out of the way and bring in our gold color. Now when we bring in our gold color here, we are going to complete our row out with 4 gold colored knots. And this is actually like the widest point of our triangle in our pattern. Continuing with our gold color, so we will start doing 3 forwards knots, working our way back left to right as we start to close out the other half of our triangle. So we'll do 3 gold knots, and then we're going to push that up and out of the way and switch back to our green color to keep that border consistent. We're going to do 2 forwards knots and then switch over to our white color once again. So there we are with our first green knot, adjusting everything as we go, and then we move into our second. And there we are for number 2. Now we're going to push that green string out of the way and bring the white string back in. In switching the white string back in, we are going to do 2 forwards knots with that white string. And this kind of, I mean, technically it's a border, I guess, but because it's the background color, I'm thinking of it as a space. So I want to say space and not border, but I guess technically it is a like double border around that triangle. So we've gone ahead and we've done 1 knot, and here we go for number 2. And then we're going to grab our maroon string and start into another triangle at the top of our pattern here. We're going to grab that maroon string, and because we have 1 at the very top center repeat point, we're actually going to just do 2 maroon knots here. And so the top edges of our small triangles actually meet on that line, and that's why that line in particular is the repeat point of the pattern. So there we are for 1 and 2. Now, similar how we worked the gold in the last row, we're going to actually continue on with our burgundy here, and we're going to go ahead and start working right to left, doing backwards knots, and we'll complete 3 burgundy backwards knots before we switch back to that white. With that white, we're going to switch back into with that white, we're going to do 2 backwards knots to complete that border before we switch into the green color for the green double border. Once at that point, we will complete out the row with our gold color. With our green now in hand, we're going to complete our border diligently as ever with 2 backward knots, and then we'll progress into our gold color once again. Back at our gold color, we are going to complete out the row with 2 backward knots and then start out our next row with the final knot of our gold triangle, doing a single forward knot. Now, just as we've done on the entire outside of this triangle, we're going to go ahead and grab our green, and we're going to do 2 more border knots here. We're working left to right now, so we are doing forward knots. So once we're done those 2 green knots, we're going to go ahead and just like the last few rows, we're going to grab our white and do 2 white forward knots to create either, depending on how you want to look at it, the second border or that space between our border and our triangle pattern. Now at this point, I do have to apologize because I've had to move to the quiet space in the house, which is actually the kitchen living room. Unfortunately, also, I need dishes to eat off of. So the dishwasher is going in the background. So if you hear any, noises, water, that sort of thing, any kind of humming, that is my dishwasher going. So I apologize for that. I don't know if you will be able to hear it at all though, because I'm actually using my phone as a microphone because I don't know where my actual microphone has gone. I have to go dig and see if I can find it, but that's what I'm working with today, and I really wanted to get a video up, so here we are. All right, now that we've completed both those green knots and those white knots, we're gonna go ahead and grab our maroon. Now with our maroon, we're gonna start our second triangle on our descent, and we're also going to start finishing up that top triangle. So you're going to do 1 knot with the maroon, Then we're going to bring our background color in again, that white, and we're going to do 1 knot with our white string before switching back to the maroon, and then we're going to finish out the row with a solid 2 forward knots to complete this line. Honestly, it's been so long since I've recorded. It all feels awkward. The filming felt awkward. The recording the voiceover feels awkward. The actual editing and snipping felt weird and like I was cutting at the wrong places, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but like there's a certain amount you have to trim down that I've kind of learned from trial and error to reach a point where people aren't too angry about it. So kind of odd, but it all just feels foreign right now. So I apologize if this is not the most top tier video I've put out, but we got to get back on somewhere. So here we are. Now we're starting our next row here. So we're working right to left, and that's backwards knots. So we go ahead and we finish out that top triangle with just 1 single maroon knot. And then we're going to switch back to our white background color. With our white background color, we're going to go ahead and do 2 backward knots with that white color, and then start working into the second triangle to close out the descent of triangles. You know, normally all the patterns I've made have been predominantly like picture things like a shark or a mountain, and I feel like there's a lot more descriptors you can use. Well, oh, we're closing out the shark's fin. Oh, we're closing out this first mountain peak. And here I am like, it's triangles and lines, and I feel like it's very awkward to explain. All right, so we've done our 2 white knots and we've gone back to our maroon. I need to stop blabbering. And we're gonna do 2 knots with our maroon color, going backwards knots, of course, because we're working right to left. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to tuck this up and out of the way and switch over to our white color. You guessed it. I know you did. You're so smart, man. You're good looking and you're smart. I knew it. I knew it. So we're gonna go ahead and we got 2 white background knots here, and then we'll be into our green, which is something that is disappearing here. I don't know where you guys live, but right now things are starting to cool off. The leaves are all starting to turn color, and they're dropping off the trees. It's only a matter of time until all the green is gone and there's a layer of snow. It wouldn't be uncommon. Normally we get our first snowfall around October 1st here, but still every year I hope that it doesn't come. Yet I live in Canada, so it always will, but I digress. So we've gone ahead and I've done those 2 knots with the green, which takes us right to the end of this row. Now starting the next row, we're actually going to grab that green again, and we're going to go ahead and do just a single knot with it. Working left to right, we are always doing forwards knots, so that's what I have done here. Now we're going to tuck that up and in behind and grab our white color. With our white, we're going to do the same thing we've done for the last bajillion rows, which is do 2 forward white knots. Nothing new, nothing extreme, which is both good if you're looking for a relatively simple pattern to knot that doesn't need a lot of concentration or focus or minding of the pattern, but in a video like this, gets a little repetitive. Then we're going to switch to the maroon, and we're going to do 3 maroon knots. This will give us the center point of the triangle that we are working on, and then we will start our next triangle. We'll see the start of it in our next row. So there's 2 and 3. And we're gonna tuck that back out of the way and finish out the row with just a set of white knots all the way to the end. And then we're actually going to turn around and do 3 backward white knots to start out the next row. So I'm gonna go ahead and zip through these few white knots, and I'll meet you back when we start getting back into the pattern. start to get a little bit excited because we can really start to see kind of our pattern really coming to life. We're coming into this last bit of this first triangle portion of our pattern, and it's starting to look really good. We can see the pattern before our eyes. So now that we've done those backwards knots to start out the row, we're going to grab our maroon string and we're going to go ahead and do 2 backward knots with the maroon string. Then we're going to switch to our white. Did I say backward or background? I meant backward. If I said background, I am sorry. Now we need to switch to our white color, which is the background color, and we're going to do a backward knot with it, and then switch back to our maroon once more. So always tucking that up and out of the way, we're going to grab that maroon string and pull it down underneath the white string. We're going to do 1 single knot with our maroon string. And then this will be the last time in this little triangle set that we grab our white string and do 2 white knots. So with our 2 white knots, we're then going to turn around and do 1 single white knot to start out our next row. Now we're going to start into building our last triangle in this portion of the pattern. So we're going to grab that maroon string and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 forward knots as we're working left to right with that maroon string before we switch off to our white and do 2 knots with that as well. So there we are for 1, and here we are for 2. Then we're going to tuck that up and out of the way, and we're going to grab the white string. With the white string, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 forward knots with the white string as well. And with the white strings, with the white knots done, we're going to switch over then to our maroon string and complete 1 single knot with the maroon string to finish out that second triangle. So grabbing the maroon, as I said, we're going to do 1 knot here and then finish out the row with 3 white knots. All right, friends, now we're going to actually start our alternating triangle. So the triangle that comes in from the top of the pattern. So we're going to grab that green and we're going to go ahead and do a single green knot. Then we're going to switch over to our white and we're going to go ahead and do 5 white knots. Now remember, we're working right to left, so all of these knots are backwards knots. With those 5 knots complete, we're going to go ahead and switch back over to our maroon color, and we're going to do the rest of the row with maroon knots. So that's 3 backward maroon knots right to the end. Alright, so now we're going to grab our background color, our white here, and we're going to go ahead and do 1 forward knot with our white. Now you can see, and I've mentioned it once already in the video, but you really want to make sure that the only string you're locking in is the last one that you worked with. So you could see that I was just pulling the green string out of the way. That's all I want to sandwich in. Otherwise you get kind of a pillowing effect, which I've talked about in some other videos, but it's essentially a buildup of string that you've basically attached to the back, and it makes your bracelet kind of buckle and be like squishy in the middle and raised. It's kind of a weird effect, but that's why you only want to lock in like one color. So once we've done that one knot with our white string, we're going to switch back to our maroon, and we're going to go ahead and do 2 forward knots with the maroon color. So there's 1, and 2. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our white again, and we're going to do 4 forward knots with our white, and then finish out the row with our green. Again, with that green in hand, we're starting our green border on the triangle that's going to go the opposite direction of the one that we just completed. So we're going to grab that green, and we're going to do 2 forward knots with the green. That'll take us right to the very end of our row. And then we're going to bring in our next color, which is going to kind of follow the same pattern that our initial starting in line is. Starting in line? The stripes at the beginning of our pattern, and that means we're going to actually switch over to our gold color now. So with our gold, we're going to do 1 single knot, and then we're going to switch back to our green, and of course we're working right to left, so y'all know we're doing backwards knots. So we've done 1 gold backward knot, and then we're going to switch over to that green. With that green, we're going to do 2 green knots. Double green's a dream, you know? So we're going to put 2 green knots in there. There's 1. And you can see I'm adjusting that gold string a bit because it will kind of roll when you're making a color change on the edge. We just want to snatch it back in there. So we're going to tug on that if you need to. So we've gone ahead and we've done our 2 green knots. Then we're going to switch over to our white. And with our white, we're going to do a whopping 3 knots, and then switch over and finish out the last of our small maroon triangles from the other side. We like officially finished kind of like the first major marker point of the pattern. Does that make sense? Switching out our white string, we're going to go ahead and grab that maroon string, and we're going to do that 1 single knot to finish off the last small triangle here. So here we go. Put that in there, and then we're going to tuck it to the back and switch back out to our white color and finish out the row with our white. And then our next row actually starts with a string of white knots as well. So then we're going to turn around and do 5 forward knots. I said that like a question, like I'm not looking at the bracelet right now. We're going to do 5 forward knots and then switch back to our green. Our green in hand, we're gonna do how many knots, guys? How many knots? You guess? I'll let you guess right now. If you guess 2, you are correct. Why am I like this? Ugh, I don't know. So here we go. We've got 1 and 2. Then we're going to push our green to the back and we're going to bring in our gold color to finish out the row. So there we go for one. And here we go for two. En deux. So there we are, two. I'm just sitting here having like a dance party in my head. I didn't think it was possible to have as many songs stuck in your head as I've got stuck in my head right now. But I've got at least like 3 songs stuck in my head right now. The main one is, ooh, she a rebel, she a bad bitch, baby, she a devil. Like, stuck. When I tell you, it's like ingrained in the folds of my brain right now. I can't get it out of my head. So now that we're starting our next row, we're gonna grab our maroon string and we're going to do a single backward knot. We're gonna tuck that up and out of the way, and then we're going to bring our gold color right back in to do, you guessed it, 2 knots. And then we're gonna switch it and we're gonna grab that green, and you know what we're gonna do? You guessed it again, 2 green knots. For 2 green knots, just like we have been, it feels like eternally. We're gonna grab this green. I know I keep repeating that, like I'm not happy with this pattern. I do really like this pattern. Just when I'm sitting here watching it back and I've been staring at my computer screen for like 6 hours, editing and voiceovering and trimming and stuff as I'm voiceovering, I'm rather bored, I'm not going to lie. So I apologize if I sound like I'm complaining. I'm not meaning to. I do really enjoy this pattern and I do hope you guys really like it. So we finished those 2 green knots, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our white, and we are going to, of course, finish out the row and start our next row with a string of whites. So we're going to finish out this row with 4, and then we're going to start our next row with 3, and I will meet you back after we're done that chunk. Also, I'd just like to point out, yes, I am like an hour into this and still saying, I'll meet you right back, as if you guys aren't still here 3 seconds from now, because that's what it is in like your time, like a handful of seconds. And then I'm like, yep, I'm right back here. Anyways, we're gonna grab that green string and we're gonna go ahead and we're going to do our 2 knots in our green string, like you know we do. And then we're going to switch over to our gold color. And with our gold color, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do another 2 knots. And again, you can see I'm moving things out of the way so we're not trapping in too many strings in behind. So we go ahead and we're going to do our 2 gold knots. There's 1. And there is 2. Now, I think I want to say it was the Spider-Man video where I went into that pillowy effect a little bit more because it was a little more noticeable of a problem in that brace or that keychain. So if that's something you want to know more about, definitely check out that video because I do recall talking about it in much more depth there. Now we're going to finish out this row with our maroon color. which is 2 knots. And then we're actually going to tuck our maroon up and out of the way and bring in our white color. We're going to do 1 backward knot because we're now working right to left. And then we're going to tuck that white color up and out of the way. Now we're going to grab our burgundy color again, burgundy, maroon, whatever you want to call it, again. And we're going to do, you guessed it, 2 whole knots. Backwards knots because again, we're going right to left. There's 1, and here we go for 2. And you're going to tuck this string up in behind your other bass strings and pull in the gold. The gold is going to go ahead and, you guessed it, do a whole 2 knots as well. And then we're going to switch into the green and carry on with more of the same. There we go for 1, and there we go for 2. Now we're going to tuck our gold up right in behind these bass strings, and we're going to grab the green. And with our green, we're going to do 2 backward knots with our green, just like we did our last 2 colors. And this is creating like a striped border around what will be a little white triangle. So there's 1. And there is 2. Then we're going to finish out this row with our white color. Then we'll do 1 white knot to kick off our next row. So there's 1 and 2. And then we're going to start working back left to right. So we're going to do a single forward knot in our white color. And then we're going to switch over to our green. Now with our green in hand, we're going to go ahead and we are going to do 2 forward knots with our green before we move into our gold color once more. So there is 1, or half of 1. There is 1. And there is 2. Now we're going to push this green color back and out of the way and grab our gold color. And our gold color is going to do 2 knots as well. Say it ain't so, I will not go. Literally the phrase, say it ain't so, when I said another 2 knots, went through my head and that immediately triggered that song. Immediately. If you're with me and you're still watching and I said, say it ain't so, tell me if that song popped into your head too. Let me know down in the comments. If anyone is still watching at this point, kudos, you're a real one. So once we've done our 2 knots with our gold, we're going to go ahead and we're going to switch to the burgundy. And with the burgundy, we're going to go ahead and do 2 more burgundy knots. Say it ain't so, I will not go. Turn the lights off, carry me home. Na 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 na. It's okay. I'm okay. I'm not okay. This is what I'm talking about, guys. Like, I'm in one of those moods where literally every phrase is like jump starting a song in my head, which is like equal parts fun, but equal parts like my focus isn't there, if you know what I mean. Anyways, we've done our 2 maroon knots, and we're going to finish out this row with our white, and then we're going to turn around and we're actually going to start our next row with the white as well. So we're finishing out with 2 white knots, or 2 white knots here. Yes, that's correct. And then we're going to do 3 backward knots as we start moving our way back right to left. This is going to be the center point of this here triangle before we start back to our maroon color, and it's going to do, you guessed it, 2 more knots with that maroon color. Then we'll be switching into our gold. You know, the more I look at this, I'm like, it's kind of a fall vibe, these colors. I'm not gonna lie. The more I look at this bracelet, the more that I like really kind of like these colors. I know it's a little not my normal color scheme, but like, I feel like it's kind of a vibe. What do you think? Do you think I should have totally done something different? Are you like, ew, what are these colors, Megan? Let me know. So now we've completed those maroon knots, maroon, burgundy. What is the difference between maroon and burgundy? I'm sure one has like more brown and one has more red or something. Anyways, with our gold color, we're going to do 2 backward knots here. So there's 1. And here is 2. Look at us go. And then we're going to swap that out and bring in our green to finish out the row. Doing the mirror of exactly what we just did with our first set of stripes here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 1 forward knot with our white string, and then we're going to progress into the same 2-2-2 pattern that we have done the last few rows. So we're going to grab that green and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 forward knots with our green because we are working left to right. So there we go for 1. And here we go for 2. And that's going to carry us right into our gold color now. So moving to our gold, we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing, those 2 knots with the gold. Bring that gold color in, do 2 knots with the gold, and then we move into our maroon and do 2 knots with that color as well. There's 1 and 2. Now we're going to push that up and out of the way and grab our burgundy maroon color, and we're going to pull that back in and do 2 knots with that as well as we start closing out the second half of this triangle. This also puts us just past the halfway point of the repeat section of this pattern. So we know I marked where the pattern starts repeating from. We're now in this absolute middle of that repeat section. Now, well, the last row was the absolute middle. So now we're on our just past the middle point of that repeat section. Now we've switched into our white and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 white knots. And then we're going to start out our next row with our white as well, turning right back around and doing 1 white backward knot. We're going to tuck that up and in behind all of our base strings, and we're going to go ahead and grab our burgundy maroon string here, and we're going to do 2 backward knots with it as well. So there is 1 and there is 2. Now we're going to tuck that up and out of the way, and we're going to grab our gold color, and just like everything before it, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 gold knots, backwards knots specifically, with our gold color. And this is just building up that border on the second half of our triangle here. So there's 1, and here we go for 2. Then we're going to push that all the way to the back, and we're going to grab our green string. And we're going to bring our green color in, and we're going to go ahead and do 2 backward knots with our green color. And then we're going to finish our row out with some white. So we're going to do 2 white knots and then kickstart off our next row with 3 white knots. I'll meet you there. Grab our green and we're going to start right back into that border pattern. So with our green, we're going to go ahead and we're working left to right. So we're going to be doing 2 forward knots with that green color. So there we go for 1. And then here we go for 2. Then we're going to push our green up and out of the way, and we're going to bring in our gold color. And our gold color is going to do just like our green did, 2 forward knots. And then we'll finish out our row with our burgundy color, where we'll do 2 burgundy knots after these here gold ones and start out our next row with a single burgundy knot. So there's 1. And here's our last gold knot here of the row. And then we're going to tuck that up and behind these last 2 bass strings and go ahead and bring in our burgundy color. Maybe we should call it Merlot. Merlot. That sounds too fancy. I'm going to forget that. It's going to be burgundy or maroon through the rest of the video. So we're going to go ahead and do 1 knot with that color. We're going to do 1 more, of course. And then we're going to turn right back around and start working right to left in our backwards knots. And we're going to go ahead and do 1 single burgundy knot to finish out our burgundy border on this here triangle. Now we're going to push that back and out of the way, and we're going to grab our gold color. With our gold color, we're going to start working on finishing that one. So we're going to do 2 backwards knots with our gold color to continue our border pattern here. So there is 1, and here is 2. Then we're going to swap that out and we're going to bring in the green. Now with the green, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 knots with our green as well. So there's 1. And here is 2. And then we're going to jump back into our white again, and we're going to do 4 white knots. We're going to turn around and come back and do 5 white knots. So voice over me will meet you back at that point. So at this point, we're going to go ahead, we're going to grab our green and we're going to do 2 forward knots with our green because again, we're working left to right. That means we're doing forward knots. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to do 2 forward knots with our green. So there is 1. And then we're going to go into 2. And then we're going to switch over to our gold color, tucking the green up and underneath our base strings. We'll move our gold back into that green's space. And we're going to finish out our row with our 2 gold knots. And then we're going to start out our next row with our final knot of our gold border. So there we are for 1. And here we go for 2. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn around and start our next row working right to left, backwards knots. We're going to do 1 backward knot with our gold, and that's going to be the last knot of our gold border on this triangle. Now we're going to tuck that gold up and out of the way and we're going to bring in our green string and we're going to go ahead and do 2 green knots. Now this row, we don't finish out with the white. We do 2 green knots and then we're going to go ahead, grab our white color, and we're actually going to do just 3 white knots as we start into our next triangle in the same style as the one we've already completed at the start there. So we're going to go ahead, like I said, we're going to complete 3 backward white knots. So there's 1, and 2, and our final white knot here is 3 for this little section anyways. 3. Now we're going to push that back and out of the way. We're going to do a single burgundy knot, and this will be the start of our first little triangle in our pattern. So there we go for our 1 burgundy knot. We're going to push that back and out of the way and we're going to grab our white to finish out this row. And then we're going to whip back around and start working left to right with a single white knot. All right, guys, I promise we are almost to the end of the repeat point. Now we're going to grab our maroon and we're going to do 2 maroon knots. Remember, we're working left to right. We've already got our first white knot in place. So we're going to do 2 forwards knots here. That's going to be the start of building the next set of triangles. The repeat point ends when we reach the first half of the 3 small triangles. So we're already cracking into it. So there we are. Then we're going to tuck that burgundy up and out of the way. We're going to go ahead and grab our white string and we're going to jump into 4 white knots. Our 4 white knots are then going to jump into our green to start finishing out the last of our green border on that alternate triangle there. So we've completed our white knots. Now we're switching over to the green like I had mentioned earlier, and we're going to do 2 forward knots with our green color. This is going to finish out this row, And then we're going to whip around and do one single backward knot to finish out the green border on this triangle. This is kind of the second pattern marker in this pattern, really. So now we're going to do that one single backward knot, and that completes the green border on this alternate triangle. Now we're going to tuck that green up and out of the way, and we're going to go ahead and grab our white for a string of 5 white knots. Pushing that white out of the way, we're going to grab our burgundy again, and we're going to finish out the row with this for 3 burgundy knots. Now moving that up and out of the way, my microphone does not look like it's recording. Oh, it is. Moving that up and out of the way, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our white string, and we're going to do a single white knot. Then we're going to switch back to our burgundy color again and complete the next steps of our triangle, which, as you may have guessed already, is going to be 2 forward knots. So grabbing that burgundy string, we're going to bring it in, and we're going to complete those 2 knots. And then we're going to switch back to our white for just a short period as we start into our second triangle. So here we are for 1. And then again, you saw me adjusting that white string. I always do that when I have a single color, a single knot color change on the edge, 10 times out of 10. All right, I've done the 2 knots with the burgundy. Now we're going to bring in that white again, and the white is going to do 2 knots, and then we're going to switch back to our burgundy to start the next triangle. So there we go for 1. And here we go for 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy. All right, now we've completed 2 knots. We're going to go back to our burgundy color, and we're going to do a single burgundy knot to kick off our second triangle. At which point we're going to tuck that up and out of the way. And then we're going to switch to our white to finish out this row and start up the next row. So we're going to finish out with 3 forward knots, and then we're going to kick it back around to start backwards knots right to left for 3 white knots as well. Now that we've got our 3 forward and 3 backward knots done, we're going to bring in that burgundy color again, and we're going to do 2 burgundy knots to start flushing out our second triangle here. So there is 1. And here we go for 2. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to switch over to our white color again and do a single white knot before we switch back to our burgundy to finish our first triangle. So here we go for solo white. Here we go for 1. You realize when you do voiceovers on these that you can speak much, much faster and give instructions much, much faster than you're actually nodding them. All right, now we're going to bring in that burgundy color and we're going to do a single burgundy knot as well. And then we're going to switch back to that white color and finish out the row with our white, thus completing our first little triangle in this portion of the pattern. All right, so there is 1, or half of 1. There's 1. Okay, now we're going for 2. And then at this point, we start introducing our colors for our internal triangle, just like on the last side. So we're going to tuck this white up and out of the way and kickstart our next row, working left to right with a single forward knot in our green color. Now pulling in our green, like I said, we're just going to do 1 knot with that. And then we're going to switch back to our white. Now you tell me, in your mind, when you look at this pattern, is that white a space or a stripe? Is it a space because it's the background, or do you consider it a stripe? When I look at it, I don't know why, but I think of it as a space and not a stripe. But I think of the triangle in the last little section we did as a triangle. Like, that's not a space. It's weird how our brains think like that sometimes. Anyways, moving on. We're gonna go ahead. We've got 1 knot done. Here we go for our second white knot. And then we're going to switch back to our burgundy color and finish out the center point of our second triangle. There we go. A second triangle is now a trecond. That's just, them's the rules. So with our burgundy color, we are going to finish out the center of our second triangle. So there we go for 3 knots. So 1 and 2. I feel like I'm counting out sit-ups or push-ups or something. 2 and 3. I mean, is bracelet making a workout? Can we call these reps? I just did 3 reps. 3 reps of burgundy. Nailed it! And then we're going to swap out to our white color and we're going to go ahead and do 3 knots with our white to finish out the row. Now with our 3 finished, we're going to start our next row with a burgundy knot to kick off our 3rd triangle, the top of our pattern. So there we go for 1. We're going to tuck that up and out of the way, and we're going to switch back to our white color, and we're going to do 2 white knots before we switch back to our burgundy to complete the 2nd triangle. So there we go for 1. And here we go for 2. And then we're going to push that up and out of the way, and we're going to grab our burgundy color. Now with our burgundy color, we're going to do 2 knots because we're starting to close out that 2nd triangle. So there we go for 1. And here we go for 2. And then we're going to push that up and out of the way, and we're going to move over to our white color. And with our white, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 knots. And this is going to start our border pattern once again. So 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, as you do. So we're going to go 1 and 2. And then we're going to switch over to our green color to finish out the row. To start off this row with our triangle color, which on this triangle is the gold. So we're going to go ahead and do 1 forward knot as we're working left to right with our gold color before we switch back into our border pattern and we do ourselves a solid, steady 2 green knots. So here we go for those green knots. We're going to push the gold up and out of the way, and we're going to grab that green string, pulling it in underneath the gold color, as you do. And if you don't, that's what you should be doing. So we're going to grab that green. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do a 1 and a 2. Then we're going to switch over to our white color. And we're going to do our 2 in the space. So here we are for 1. And here we are for 2. Then we get to do an exciting thing. We get to bring in our maroon color again. So we're going to push our white back and out of the way, and we're going to bring in the maroon color to finish off our second triangle. This is exciting because we are getting so close to the repeat point, guys, at which point I will bow out and you will be able to continue on with the instructions already here. So there we go, our single maroon knot. Now we're going to push that back up and out of the way, and we're going to bring in our white color once more for a single knot. With our white color, we're going to do 1 single knot, and then we're going to switch over to our maroon to finish out the row and start building up our final triangle of our repeat point. Huzzah! Yes. My mouth is getting dry, my jaw is getting sore from talking for so long. Because you also have to know there's so many clips and takes that I have cut out. I've been talking for hours, not even kidding. So now we switch over to our maroon color, and like I said, we're going to do 2 knots to finish out this row. Then we're going to whip it back around, and we're going to go ahead and do 3 maroon knots to kick off our next row. With our 3 maroon knots done, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our white color. Our white color is going to continue in this border / space part of our bracelet, where we're going to take that and we're going to go ahead and do 2 backwards knots, because again, we're working right to left. I cannot say that enough, or I feel like I can. I feel like we're past the point of saying that enough, and I'm still saying it. So here we are. There we go for 1, and we're going to switch over to our second string here and go for 2. And then we're going to swap that back up and out of the way, and we're going to pull in the green instead. Pulling in our green color, we're going to do the exact same thing. 2, 2, 2. You know how it is. We're going to do 2 knots with our green color. And then we're going to switch to our gold. So push that up out of the way and bring our gold in underneath it. And with our gold, we are going to complete 2 knots to finish out this row. And then we're going to whip around and start our next row, working left to right, going forwards knots for 3 knots. Bring in our green, as you know we do. We're going to bring in that green for 2 knots. So here we go for 1. And here we go for 2. Then we're going to switch over to our white color. So pushing that back up and out of the way, we're going to bring in our white. And with our white, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 2 knots with the white. So there is 1. And here is 2. And then we're going to swap out to our maroon color and we're going to finish out the row with our maroon, doing 2 knots with the maroon and then whipping around and starting the next row with a single maroon knot. Which is very, very exciting, y'all, because this next row is the end of the repeat point. You heard it. We are at the end of the repeat point. So, this row coming up right now, we're going to do a single maroon knot. Then we're going to switch over to our white and we are going to do 2 white knots. There's 1. And here we go for 2. There's 1. And there's 2. Then we're going to switch over to our green color and we're going to start completing out this border pattern. We're reaching the peak of the border pattern. So we're going to bring in that green and we're going to do 2 green knots. There's 1 and 2. And then we're going to switch out to our gold color to finish out this row with a solid 4 gold knots. And that will complete our repeat section. So what does that actually mean? That means for the length that you need, however much more additional length you need to put on, you're going to go back to the repeat point that I had marked on the screen and you're going to go from there to here as many times as you need to get your length, at which point you're going to, when you want to finish out, you're going to do to the midpoint, and instead of closing out the repeat point, you're going to just draw those stripes right off the edge instead of closing out the triangle, just like we did at the start. It's very straightforward and I'm sure you can do it. But that concludes this pattern, guys. So if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. If you have suggestions for other patterns, please do leave them in the comment box below. And I will see you guys for the next one. All right, bye.